right here also. Well, this is part 3 of a study that we've been doing and started on Thursday, part 1. Part 2 was this morning, and now part 3, and there may be a part 4. We'll have to see. Have to see how that goes. Some of my grape water. Excuse me. I have a cup of chocolate coffee right there. Anyway, this morning, I did a rehearsal. I went back over just a few lines of what we had done on Thursday. And I'm not going to go back over that again this evening, of course. And, excuse me, I'm not going to go back over the things that we went through this morning, except to say that we did end up in Isaiah chapter 6. And I did about 2 minutes preaching at the end of the teaching there concerning the mouth. But this is where in Isaiah 6:1, where Isaiah saw the Lord high and lifted up, or my version says lofty and lifted up, sitting on a throne, and the train of his robe was filling the temple. The seraphim were there and all. So, excuse me, I had some potato chips, probably like I shouldn't have done. Anyway, so tonight we're not going to have a long study either. I'm trying to make this relatively short. I don't want to lose your interest, and the whole sermon could probably take 2 hours if I did it all at one time, maybe longer. But I want you to go with me to Genesis 32. Genesis 32. And we've covered that a little bit. We've covered that a little bit at times. In fact, it was the subject of one of the messages within the last month or two, the particular passage we're going to. But we're going to start at Genesis 32 and 17. And I'm not going to read, I'm just going to mention. In verse 17, he commanded the one in front, saying, when my brother, now this is Jacob. Jacob is concerned. He's finally coming home like God told him to do. He's coming home, and he's afraid of his brother Esau, that he's going to get killed. And so he's divided his family in two and has 2 different companies. And he's thinking if Esau attacks one, then this wife can get away. And if he attacks this one, my wife and family over here can escape. So anyway, he commanded the one in front, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong, and where are you going? And to whom do these animals belong? And I want you to say, well, these belong to Jacob, your brother. These belong to your servant Jacob. And it's a present sent to you, Esau, from your brother. And he's back there. He'll be along in a few hours. Verse 19, and I also want you to say, behold, your servant Jacob is also behind us, for he said, I will appease him with a present. Tell him Jacob wants to appease you, Esau, with a whole lot of animals and gifts and everything. So verse 21 then, so he pressed past on before him, while he himself spent the night in the camp. So he's got his servants out there, but he's been somewhat frightened. Jacob, he's exhausted. I'm surprised that he was able to go to sleep, but it had been a long push, long journey, getting everything done, getting the family kind of separated and getting everything in place. So I preached on this when I had a message a while back on alone prayer, not just praying alone, but really being alone in prayer. And we talked about Yaakov in this passage, Genesis 32:21. And so we're going to continue from there tonight on this message. This fits right in to what we're talking about now. So Genesis 32, verse 22 is where I'm picking up now, and I'm reading out of the New American Standard Version. I know that's not new to anybody. Now he arose the same night and took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children, and he crossed the ford at the Jabbok. He took them and he sent them across the stream, and he sent them across, whatever he had, with whatever he had. Verse 24, Genesis 32, 24. Then Jacob was left alone. Then Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, when this man, saw that he had not prevailed against Yaakov, Jacob, he touched the socket of his thigh, so that the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. Now, I preached on this, like I said, when I talked about alone prayer. But I contacted a doctor friend of mine today who has a birthday today and asked about what happens. Can the leg, I guess, I forget what it is, femur, whatever this bone is up here, can it really come out of a socket? And the answer was yes, it does. It generally takes a trauma like a big fall or something. And I learned a few things about all that. But the fact of the matter is, if it's really out of socket, we're going to see him walking away, I was told today, couldn't really walk on it. But if it was just dislocated, which is the word that's used in my New American Standard, it might have been painful, but he could have hobbled along. But the thing that was interesting too is the doctor told me that it would have been very, very painful. Those things are painful. So here's Jacob wrestling with this man. The man touches his thigh here, his hip, and dislocates the socket. And there at the thigh. And that had to be very, very painful, which the man knew and knew what he was doing. So anyway, when he wrestled with him till daybreak, and when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while they were wrestling together. Then he said to him, now, and this has to be interesting in light of what I just told you about all the pain and all. Then he said to him, let me go, let me go, let me go. That it's dawning here. I've got to get going. But he said, that is, Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So this man says to him, and he knew, but he said, so what is your name? And Jacob said, Yaakov, Jacob. He said, my name is Jacob. And this man said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Yisrael, Israel. Jacob became Israel. Because you have striven with God. We just learned something there, huh? For you have striven with God and with men, and you've prevailed. You stuck in there, and you have prevailed. Well, verse 29, then Jacob asked him, saying, well, please tell me your name. But he said, why do you even ask my name? Why do you ask my name? And he, this man, blessed him. Genesis 32:30. So Jacob named the place Peniel. Now, if you were watching this morning, you remember that I said that the face in Hebrew is panim. Panim. Pe, mouth. Nose is off. Ha-ozen, ayin. The face altogether is panim. And El means, you got it. Someone got it. El means God. So he named the place there the face of God. Peniel. Peniel, the face of God. Now, why would he name that place the face of God? Now we're getting a little more complicated in this whole lesson, and this is part 3 of the lesson, but we're learning things here. So he named it Peniel, for he said, now listen to what he says, and you might want to mark chapter 32, verse 20, 30, 32, 30. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God, Peniel, Peniel. No, Panim, Panim. I've seen God face to face. And then he says this, and yet my life has been preserved. Now, Jacob knew that if you see the face of God, you can't live. I mean, this is serious stuff. I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been preserved. Now, we're going to read this in another story here pretty soon also, so keep this in mind. I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been preserved. Verse 31 and 32. Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Penuel, and he was limping on his thigh. Why was he doing that? Because the man, God that he was wrestling with, had touched him and dislocated his hip. Why would he do that? Well, first off, we know it changed his walk. When you're wrestling with God, it'll change your walk. But he made it difficult. God doesn't make sticking in there in prayer with him always easy. And it doesn't mean that he does things to you physically necessarily, although he could. But God wants us to stick in there. He wants us to be consistent and persistent in our prayers. But that's a sermon for another time. So Genesis 32 and 32. Therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew, the ligament. I was told today the sinew is a ligament of the hip, which is on the socket of the thigh, because he, this man, touched the socket of Jacob's thigh in the sinew of his hip. Now that's a little extra information, and I don't want to get off on that, but what I do want to get off, what I want to go back to is, he called the name of that place Peniel, face of God, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been preserved. Very interesting, to say the least. Well, let's go to another story, and I think I may have touched on this, again, this passage in the last month, but here we are again. Go with me to Exodus 24, and we'll start at verse 1. Exodus 24, and we will start at verse 1. Got to get there myself. Exodus 24, verse 1. Excuse me. While you're finding that, I have a great drink of grape water. Then he, that is God, Exodus 24, verse 1. Then God said to Moses, come up to Yahweh, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel, and you shall worship at a distance. Moses alone, however, shall come near to Yahweh, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people come with them. Verse 3, then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of Yahweh, all of the ordinances, And all of the people answered with one voice and said, after he finished telling them everything, all the words which Yahweh has spoken, we will do. By the way, did they? I think I heard no. Correct? No. So he spoke all the words, and then in verse 4, Moses wrote down all the words of Yahweh. Then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the door of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He sent young men with him. He sent young men of the sons of Israel, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls and as peace offerings to Yahweh. Moses took half of the blood and put it in the basins, and the other half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Verse 7, we're getting kind of to where I wanted to get, but I'm giving a little bit of background here. Then he took the book of the covenant, and he read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that Yahweh has said, has spoken, we will do. This is the second time now this has passed over their lips. All of us will be obedient. So now pay closer attention as we are in verse 9. Moses went up with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel. And they saw, verse 10, they saw the God of Israel. And under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire as clear as the sky itself. Yet he, God, he did not stretch out his hand against the nobles of the sons of Israel. And they saw God, and they ate, and they drank. Well, we're seeing a lot of evidence now. It's kind of changed gears here. Verse 12, now Yahweh said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and remain there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the law and the commandments which I have written for their instruction. Now, remember, Moses wrote down the things that God said, but God said, now I'm going to give you tablets of stone which I have written. So, and it's for their instruction. Verse 13, so Moses arose with Joshua his servant, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. But to the elders he said, you wait here for us until we return to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a legal matter, let him approach them. Then Moses went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. Now, this should strike a note with you if you were listening this morning. Verse 16, listen to this. Exodus 24:16. The glory of Yahweh rested on Mount Sinai. And you may remember this morning, remember Moses said, God, and he talked to him face to face as a man talks to his friend. And yet we read down a little bit further, and he hadn't seen the glory. And Moses said, God, I want to see all of your glory, the countenance of your glory. And remember, God said, you can't do that. I tell you what, there's a rock there. You get there in the rock. I'm going to pass by. I'll put you in the cleft of the rock, but I'm going to have my hand or shadow over you. And when I pass by, you can see my hind part, but you cannot see my face, lest you die. And remember, I mentioned today, it's not that God was going to kill someone for seeing his face. It's just that awesomeness that Paul talks about in 1 Timothy 16. He dwells in unapproachable light. I mean, the light of God's awesome glory is so much that a man would probably just disintegrate. At least that's kind of what Scripture indicates to us. And yet now, here we are back in Exodus again, 24 verse 16, and it says, the glory of Yahweh rested on Mount Sinai. Now, if God says it, then it did. But we're getting closer and closer to some of the answer that we've been asking in part 1 and part 2. I'm not going to finish it tonight, but you're getting some strong hints here. The glory, the Shekinah of God was resting on the mountain, and the cloud covered it. That's an important statement right there. And he covered it for 6 days. And on the Shabbat, on the seventh day, he called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. And to the eyes of the sons of Israel, the appearance of the glory of Yahweh was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain. Now, I'm not going to say much more than just reading it, but these are some strong hints of where we're going to go. Some of the things that are said about seeing his glory or not seeing his glory in all of his glory. And to the eyes of the sons of Israel, the appearance of the glory of Yahweh was like a consuming fire on the mountaintop. The last verse, Exodus 24:16, Moses entered the midst of the cloud as he went up to the mountain. And Moses was there on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. That's kind of interesting. 40 keeps coming up a lot of times in Scripture, doesn't it? Well, that's a part, excuse my phraseology here, but what we just read in both of those stories about Jacob wrestling with the man and him naming the place Peniel, and now this story with Moses, these are some strong hints to put all of this together. For right now, I want you to go with me to Judges. Let's see, is that what I want to do? Yeah. Let's go to Judges chapter 6. And I'm going to come back later to Judges 6 because we're going to need to cover more of that. But for right now, I want to zero in on just 2 verses, 22 and 23. That's all we're going to do. Judges 6, 22 and 23. But you might want to turn to Judges. You might want to, because then we're going to go to Judges 13. We're going to go to Judges 13. When Gideon saw that he was an angel of Yahweh, he's had a visitor. When Gideon saw that this visitor was the angel of Yahweh, Malach Yahweh, the angel, HaMalach Yahweh, the angel of the Lord, the angel of Yahweh, excuse me, not the angel of the Lord, although that's all right. The angel of Yahweh, he said, "Alas, O Adonai Yahweh, O Lord Yahweh, for now I have seen the face of the angel of Yahweh." Now listen to this. We read about the angel of Yahweh, and I've taught on this before. But here's another time around that helps verify, and repetition teaches. It's good for you to get this and see it again plainly. What does he say here? He said, "Alas, O Adonai Yahweh, for now I have seen the angel of Yahweh, panim, face to face." And Yahweh said to him, "Peace to you. Peace to you. Do not fear. You shall not die." Now Gideon sees God, the angel of Yahweh, that's Jesus before he became flesh. And when he became flesh, he was God in the flesh, John 1:14. He's taking the fear away from Gideon and saying, "Peace, have no fear, you shall not die." Now with that said, and here's where we'll finish up on another story. We're going to finish up for tonight on Judges 13. So if you would go with me to Judges 13. Judges 13. And let's see, I'm going to begin at verse 1. You know what? I want to go through this whole chapter. And this is important. So, surprise, surprise, surprise. I think I'm going to stop there with that story we just did in Judges 6. Thursday night, we will pick up, by God's grace, we'll pick up in Judges 13. And you might read that between now and Thursday. But I want to go through that whole chapter. And then we've got some other places. We're going to go back to Deuteronomy. And we'll be in Deuteronomy. We'll be back in Exodus. We'll be in Numbers. 1 John. We'll be in 2 Corinthians. So we've got a whole lot of places to go. So this may end up being, well, way more than just part 4. But this is important stuff. And it's not just history. I want you to trust me. This is important for us as Christians to see this, to understand it, to digest it, to know it. And I think then you will find for us to live it. So anyway, for this time, I'm going to say thank you for tuning in, whether it's tonight or some other day during the week. By God's grace, be here Thursday night, 7:15, all right? And so that does Facebook, and this is going to do YouTube.